at the point where we have created and tested all the tokens that we need in order to start an encounter. So what we want to do is to go to this section on the website. This is in the Dungeon Master's Guide, specifically the running an encounter article, where we are going to have to go through the preparation for starting our encounter. So we go through all these steps here. So let's start at step one. Obviously, you want to switch to the map which you've created, and we've actually already done that. We have that right here, and as you know, we've been creating everything on this map. But assume you've actually imported in an actual image of a map that you want to do, and you've adjusted the grid and the squares are all good. We won't go through all that because I'm assuming if you've used map tool before, you know how to do all that stuff. So we'll just do it on the plain grasslands map, and let's see, we'll space out these guys nicely here, and we'll go back to the browser there to see what else we can do. And yeah, you can do validate campaign. We'll leave that as an exercise. Well, actually, we can do it. It's no big deal to run it actually. So why don't we actually just go click and go validate campaign? And as you can see there, it's a success. It's gone through all the maps in this campaign file and says, yeah, they all look good. They all have an info token, all that good stuff. So that's looking good right there. Let's go to step 2. Make sure at least one PC token, that will be Roll Initiative, as the null state. And I don't think this is actually strictly necessary, but you know, better safe than sorry. Yes, he does. Vanny does indeed have the null state right there. And we can actually go and see what else that says and clear this state from non-participating, yada yada yada. And yeah, and the rest macros, yeah, make sure that if applicable, all of them have been rested. If any of your players say, hey, I forgot to spend a healing surge at the end of the last battle, have them do it now. That way, you know, we can start without delay. Step number 3, ask your players whether they want to review all the stats that go into making their attacks and alter the die rolls MT generates. So what it's talking about here is in global toggles, as it says right there, and it has a link to the appropriate article there. It says to go to click on the MPB and go to global toggles. Now what this is a list of configurations of different features that the MPB can do. It's probably pretty good to leave it at the default. That's what we usually do. All this stuff that will allow hosts to roll PCs, that's actually when you're creating tokens. So we're actually past that point. SM Media Broadcast, that's if you want to send handouts and sound effects to all your players, and that's on by default. If everybody says, no, we don't like the handouts and sound effects, then you can uncheck that. But I mean, that's kind of silly. My players all like the handouts. Sound effects, not so much, but they hear it through my speakers, so that's good enough. LOS targeting. This is kind of wonky because it takes too long to describe that here. That's if you want to observe the VBLs, and so, you know, if powers are being run, if a target is behind a VBL, then you won't be able to target it if you check that box there. So, but it doesn't quite work properly, so I leave that off. You can try it if you want, no big deal. Ward grant CA bonus, that's if you're flanking or attacking with a melee attack a prone target next to you, then you will automatically get the +2. You can uncheck that if you want to add that +2 manually. Cheater beater. This is a little controversial. Let me explain the origin of this. I once had a online user who wrote to me on my forum and said, "Hey Starman, how about this situation? I got this guy. He's rolling an awful lot of 18s and 19s. I don't know about this guy. What's going on? I'd like you to actually put in a feature where I can see what he's doing exactly." Well, that's what the cheater beater is for. Well, first of all, I responded back and I said, dude, you know what? If he's doing that and if you suspect that, then you should really talk that out with him. It's not really up to me or whatever, right? But he said, oh no, but I'd want it anyway. And I said, okay, well, I don't want to tell you how to play your game, so I actually put that in. And I actually used it myself for the same purpose for one of my players. I won't say who. I'm just saying, in the past, in a certain iteration of my group, I actually put that on when we started suspecting this guy, and lo and behold, I was right. Yeah, he was kind of fudging his rolls to hit more often than he should have. So I actually, emailed the rest of the group and I said, "Hey, what should we do about this?" And they said, "I'll leave him alone. If he's going to be like that, then it's not really affecting the game." Blah blah blah. So anyway, if you want to use that, check that on, and in the chat you will get notifications. Yeah, so and so changed his two hit roll from this to this, and sometimes you have to adjust for certain situations, but that's not what was happening here. Power list and tooltips, that's the power list that comes up when you hover over your buttons. If you don't want that, uncheck. Moving dead tokens to grave. This is important. What if you have a troll that dies? You don't want him taken off the battlefield because he's going to come back to life, assuming he wasn't killed by fire or acid. You want him to come back to life. So you don't want him to move him to the grave when he's finished. He'll still turn invisible though, but that's how that's done. Verbose output, that's on. I recommend keeping that on so you know everything that's happening in the chat there. But if you really don't want that much output, then uncheck that. Power locking, keep that checked. Very important. Rumble generation, again, that's token creation, and you don't want to create Rumble tokens. That's silly. That's a holdover feature. It's an incredibly obsolete framework. All of them are. This one is the only one active left. Pause game. If you want to go get some chips or something, then click that on and say okay. Then that will disengage all your players from the framework. They won't be able to do anything. If they click any of these buttons, nothing will happen. It'll say DM has the game paused. Pretty much never use that. Fast mode prompt, that's if attacks are taking too long. That's only for attacking, nothing else. If you click that on, the framework will skip a lot of the checks it does. Like, for example, it won't check if you have a ranged weapon for a ranged power and stuff like that. It'll just let you carry on and stuff. So I recommend you keep that unchecked because you don't want to allow your players to do anything they want. And prompting, PC and NPC, uncheck these. If you want to go straight through, it processes all of your 2 hits, damage, effects, all that stuff, and on its own, and it doesn't tell you. It's non-interactive mode. That's not fun, if you ask me. That's why these two are checked. It's kind of silly because you're just letting the it's kind of like a video game. Then you're not really interacting with the game. Effect registration, we saw that in an earlier video. You check that when you're outside combat and you want to see effects being registered, like from create effect and running and all that stuff. Actually, no, running will actually register, but create effect will not. Save versus fall on prone, that's if you are pushed by force movement. You want the receiving token to receive a save prompt. Say, hey, you're being pushed over a cliff or something. You get a save. Check that, and it will ask that token for a save. But if you're on level ground across a field that's 100 yards in every direction, then no, you don't need that checked on, which is usually the case. OA versus ranged. Yes, we do want to be prompted if the guy beside you, if the enemy beside you is provoking by doing a ranged attack. Yes, we want to be prompted for that. If that's not your thing, uncheck that. Take 10, our group never uses this. If you check this, it'll ask you on a skill check if you want to take 10. So that's all that. We will leave those as they are. So that's global toggles explained in great detail. So let's go on and see what else that we have here. That was step 3. Step 4, if necessary, rename. This is very important. I'm embarrassed to admit this, but my brother, when he was DMing last time, renamed a token in the middle of a combat, which is a no-no. Don't do it. Keep the names the same. That's what's an example? If you're going to a restaurant and the host seats you, here, sit at this table and we'll have the waiter come over and stuff like that. You don't stand up and you go take another table. I mean, you can if it's a fast food restaurant, where you get your food at the counter, but the restaurant has tracked you there and they're catering to that specific table name internally on their system. If you move, the waiter's going to come to the table with the food and say, what happened to these guys? Where'd they go? Same thing with this framework. Okay, so that's the reason why. If you change the name of a token, if another token has you stunned or whatever, your name is Bob, but you change it to Robert, then the MPB is going to be expecting to go to a token called Bob, not Robert. So yeah, don't do that. So do that now if you have to, and use the rename this token macro under Frankenstein's lab if you want to do that. 5 is optional, as it says here. If running map tool in standalone mode, which is what we're going to be doing, run tactical initiative on each participating token. We actually don't have to do that, but we can. You can if you want. Uh, just if you want to see the actual initiative going through as opposed to validate, which is the next step. So you can do that before your session if you want to on all your monsters for that map anyway, and that makes it a little quicker. But number 6, run validate token ownerships. Again, very important. Let me explain this. Every single token on the map needs to have one and exactly one owner. You can't set it to all. Like, say you have one guy playing, or a couple of guys rather, playing Bob the Cleric, and you set ownership to both of them. They're connected to your server. That's not good. That validate token ownerships will come and it'll say, hey, you can't have both these guys owning Bob the Cleric. Which one do you want to own him? And it'll only assign one guy to do that. So keep that in mind. Now, indicate max token separation. Let's actually run this now and go through it. That way we can see what's going on. So what we want to do, first of all, by the way, I don't think I mentioned this in the steps, but you want to, when you get onto the map near the beginning, you want to put the info token to where the PCs will be starting when you're hit the begin encounter macro. So say we want them all to start here. I know there's only one guy, but this will illustrate it anyway. Click on the info. You can actually congregate all of them by going to move party to info. See that? Now that's a bit off because the geometry for small tokens is kind of strange. He will appear to the northwest of where you want him to appear, 1 square. And also do the MPB, the ABOS, the MMHOF. So peel those off, put them in a appropriate spot on the map. And what this does is it activates Vanny's vision, so he's able to see everything now. So we've got him where on the starting point where we want him. Now remember, we have to run validate token ownership. So what we're going to do is we're going to click that, and it says proceed with Dave, that's me, as sole player. Yes, we do want to do that. But you won't be asked this if you're in a server situation and you have connected players. So make sure your players are connected first, all of them, before you do validate token ownership. And say okay. Because what it's going to do is it's going to rifle through like all the tokens and say, well, again, who's the owner for this guy if it's not already set. Max token separation, what this is doing is it's asking, well, how's the farthest apart your tokens are going to be? If they're only in a 10 by 10 room, then the farthest they're going to be apart is like 9 squares. So you can set this to 10 and you'd be good to go. It's also a radius beyond the MPB. Its sphere of influence will be 10 squares in every direction. This is good for multi-area maps where it has a bunch of info tokens in different encounter areas. That's why you want to do this, but we only have one here, so I'll leave it as 20. We're good. All right, so choose NPC participants. And ooh, look at that, we got a skill challenge also, but that's actually not being set up. We'll see that in a later video. And we won't do all, we will just do blue and red. Say okay. And it says, okay, you want to roll initiative for those guys? We say yes. Look at that. It put the green triangles on both of them. And the PC participants is Vanny, of course. And then we have some output in the chat where it has completed the validation and give you some results. And it'll say which guys are owning which tokens typically. And yeah, we don't need this anymore because it's already transferred the tokens. That looks good. Now we also have the, remember how we talked about the send macro distribution of the handouts and sound effects? That's what this state is here, the deafen state. So if you want to actually listen in on what your players are saying with the speak function, which is right there. Then you go to toggles and go media unsubscribe. Say okay. Now this guy is going to hear anything the PC say if they do it within range. Now we have a problem here. We don't have initiative for Vanny. In a actual server game situation, what's going to happen for validate? It's going to prompt all your players for initiative in a particular order. It's kind of random, but it'll bounce back and forth between different players and say, hey, roll initiative. And that will pop up on their screen one at a time, not all at the same time. So if your players are prone to flaking around and walking away from their machine at this point, that's not good. Tell them, you know what, guys, sit down, wait for the initiative prompt to get to you, and then say, okay, check all your monsters, which is what we're going to do now. And then we'll go from there. And we'll see what happens when we do initiative on this guy, because we're going to have to do it manually now since we're not in a server situation. We're in a standalone. So we're going to have to go to tactical. Then go initiative. Say okay. There we go. That's not very good. A 1, so he's definitely going last. I'm just throwing that out there. Okay, and it's asking, well, which monsters do you want to check? And they're both of the same type. Notice how it doesn't ask for bony guy, blue, and red. It's smart enough to know that you only need to check blue because they're the same monster type. So we'll say okay. And over here, what we want to do is not check perception, because what it's going to do now is it's going to see which one is the highest one and actually do a skill check for that. If it finds perception is the highest, you're not going to get a knowledge check out of that because it's going to ignore nature and religion. It's going to see, well, perception is your biggest skill, so I'm assuming you want to do that. So that's why we're leaving it unchecked. So what it's going to do now is it's going to look at your nature score and your religion score, decide which one's the higher one, and do a check with that skill. We'll say okay. And oh, that's pretty good. We'll say okay. And do a perception check on the info token. If you have any tracks on there, any perception tracks on your info token, it'll actually display. Let's look what we got for our perception check. We see that these guys have chainmail, light shield, and longsword. And if anything else comes out of the info token, it'll be displayed here. You might want to keep that open just for reference, because usually the features of the area will be displayed in here. You know, if that set of stairs over there is difficult terrain, you need to know that. So keep that open if that's actually listed here. And for this sample demo, I haven't put any stuff on the info token, so you're good there. We can actually close that. We don't need to know he's got, you know, light shield and chainmail. That's fine. And let's see how we did with the monster. We only got his easy DC, so I guess our nature, even though it was the highest score, see how it says there, actually wasn't that great. So if you do better, I mean, and you get a bunch of, like, if you get the hard DC, you'll get his resistances and stuff like that. And for moderate, I believe you get the powers. So it will display like the flavor text for the powers, which we set up. Remember how we did that earlier when we were creating the skeleton? It will give that. Well, this is this isn't too useful either, so we'll close that. So we have achieved our objective. All the tokens that will be participating in the battle have the green check marks. Triangles. Yep, I know the difference between check marks and triangles. But speaking of check marks, they will appear in here one by one in the initiative panel with the green check mark. So that is what we're going to do next. I was actually jumping ahead there. So let's see. You'll then be asked about NPC participants. Options will include all monsters who have not yet rolled initiative. Actually, it won't be. I've actually taken out that feature, so I'm going to edit that to make sure that it's accurate. It's pretty extensive. It gets all the monsters that you want. Remember how it prompted us for all that, and respond to prompts about unowned token. We didn't get any prompts because, well, they're all properly owned, so we're good there. And yeah, I explained all this must be owned by one connected player, If a guy connects later, then you can manually give him ownership of his token that he'll be controlling, or he can run mass ownership on that and he will get control of that token. So we're looking good. And, you can have all your players synchronize their system clocks to your machine since you're running the game, and it will properly time turns and all that good stuff. And yeah, we're all looking good. We have run through all the preparation steps and we are ready to start combat, which is what we will do in the next video. That's it for preparation. Thanks very much for watching.